Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, Series 2000. This week, I'm excited to visit Scream School. I didn't know what to expect going into Scream School, and I have to say I left pretty disappointed. This book never really went anywhere interesting, and it felt like a lesser version of books we've seen before. It was honestly really predictable. It has an interesting father-son dynamic that Stein attempts to explore, but also kind of fizzles out, and it's hard to tell what he's even trying to say in the end. If you skipped this one, you wouldn't be missing anything interesting. This 1999 cover was Jacobus trying his best with the material given. This book kind of lacks any clear-cut scenes where you can be like, yep, that's the big scare of this book. So, this melty ginger troll doll that I think is supposed to be the movie villain Johnny Scream will just have to do. There was no merchandise this week, but I'm going to use this moment to warn you in advance that the clips in this video will all be from the Scream franchise and will contain spoilers. I don't usually warn for spoilers, but since Scream is so mystery-centric, it seemed like a good idea in this case. Our front tag says, Student Body Stalker, which has nothing to do with the book, because with this story it's hard to pin down a theme. But let's check out the back of this book. The two figures floated up from the pile of dusty costumes. One was a man, the other a woman. Their faces were ghoulish, skin pulled so tight Jake could see the bones underneath, eyes yellow, sunken back in their sockets, their lips cracked in purple. Now we can make our movie, the woman said, floating closer to Jake, arms outstretched side by side with the man. The most horrifying movie ever made. Okay, let's start this summary. The book opens with an introduction to Ron and Rita, and they're currently sneaking into an old haunted house. We then abruptly get some incredibly clunky paragraphs explaining the title of this book and the opening setup. If you're so scared, why did you dare me to come here? Rita snapped. Her green eyes flashed in the dim darting light. I didn't dare you, Ron protested. You dared me. No, you, Rita insisted. Don't you remember? We were walking home from school, and you said you were sick and tired of everyone calling our school Scream School. Yeah, but you said everyone in town laughs at us because we're always being terrified by ghouls and monsters and gruesome creeps. Kids at our school are always screaming their heads off, and that's why everyone calls it Scream School. And, yes, I said that, Ron interrupted, but I didn't. And then you said you weren't the tiniest bit scared of Johnny Scream. You said you didn't care how many kids that ugly dead ghoul murdered. You said you'd break right into his house, the house where he died 50 years ago, and then you dared me to come with you. The vibes are off with this opening, so I was feeling like we're in for some sort of early fake out. The two kids decide just being in the house was enough to prove their bravery, but when they go to leave, they find the doors now shut tight, so they're sealed in Johnny Scream's house. I don't know why I find the name Johnny Scream hilarious. It's just so corny, even for Goosebumps standards. While Ron and Rita are busy tugging at the door, Johnny Scream creeps over in all of his mutant glory, wielding an axe. Just before he's about to chop these kids up, there's a sudden crash from behind and he shouts, "Was that in the script? I don't think so." Because, surprise, this is a movie set. No wonder this book's opening felt so weird compared to the usual Goosebumps format. We then shift focus to our actual main character, Jake, who was the source of this unplanned crash on set. Jake's chair collapsed, causing the scene to have to be reset. Jake's dad, Emery, is a famous horror movie director, which is why Jake's on the set of a film in the first place. Jake and his father have an interesting relationship because his dad insists on his son calling him by his first name, even though Jake would prefer to call him Dad. Emery is also described as being a hurricane of a person who talks loud, fast, commands attention, and is always on the move, while Jake feels like a turtle next to his famous father. Emery sends Jake to get some food with Chelsea, the platonic best friend for this book, who just so happens to be the same age as Jake and also has a father who works in the film industry, so she's always on set too. Jake confides in Chelsea how terrible it is being the son of a famous horror movie director because everyone treats him differently, and he constantly gets asked if he's scared of his father's movies, because I'm getting the sense Jake may be a bit of a fraidy cat. Chelsea responds to this serious moment with, "So, are you scared of your father's movies?" We then get some good-natured violence between friends as Jake punches her in the arm and tries to strangle her, while she shoves a carrot stick into his nose. It's tween romance. Jake moves on to declaring how nothing scares him ever, and we promptly end the chapter on something causing Jake to scream in terror. It's Johnny Scream, looking for a snack. We learn he's the central character in the Scream School franchise, and he doesn't look like the guy on the cover. Johnny Scream's terrifying face was known around the world. 7 feet tall, straight and skinny as a skeleton, Johnny Scream stared back at Jake and Chelsea with his cold silver eyes. As if blown by the wind, his thick black hair flew around his decaying, rotting face. His grin revealed pointed yellow teeth, a chunk of skin missing from his left cheek. Gray bone poked out from underneath. Johnny removed the bony hand from Jake's shoulder. His long yellowed fingernails were curled like a canary's claws. Johnny's scream is just like, "Oops, sorry to scare you, little buddy." And Jake tries to save face by saying he was playing along and doing the official Johnny scream that all the fan club members do whenever he appears on screen. All this behind the scenes movie stuff is giving me Scream vibes with the meta commentary in the Stab series. It cuts to later that day, and Jake and Chelsea are riding back to Jake's Beverly Hills mansion in his dad's enormous black Mercedes. Jake has some rich kid bad habits and really enjoys showing off his dad's wealth, but Chelsea responds that she prefers the Volkswagen New Beetle. This is such a funny reference to me because I do remember the Volkswagen Beetle having its moment in the late 90s. My younger sister is obsessed with them too. Jake's mother announces they're having chicken for dinner, and his dad says, "Chicken for a chicken, huh, Jake?" Which feels pretty antagonistic for no reason to me. Emery then goes on to say to the mom that the set was great today until Jake totally lost it, which really upsets Jake, who insists he wasn't scared that his chair really did just break. In response, everyone tells him to learn how to take a joke. Jake's dad is kind of a prick, to be honest. Jake reaches into the bucket of chicken, only to be met with a detached, veiny yellow eyeball looking right at him. It startles him, and his dad starts cackling like it's the funniest prank in the world, even though Jake says he wasn't that scared, since his dad has done variations of this prank dozens of times. Jake then spends the rest of dinner plotting how to prove to his father that he is in fact brave, when really he should be plotting how to scare the shit out of his dad. Emery seems to really want Jake to admit when he's scared and to acknowledge his own feelings, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but mocking his kid and setting up scare traps aren't great ways to go about this. The story then cuts to a later day, and Jake is busy playing basketball with his friend Carlos. We get more insight into this strained father-son relationship because Jake goes on a tangent about how when he plays basketball with his dad, it's a stressful experience. His dad plays his hardest to win and will knock Jake to the ground if that's what it takes. My own dad made a handful of attempts at making me sporty, but they never worked. One time, he wasn't going to let me finish practicing until I threw the baseball a certain distance, and I accidentally threw the baseball into the woods to end that little bonding moment. There was a similar incident with a frisbee and the roof. But back to Jake. He's still playing basketball, and Chelsea appears to join them, giving us 4 solid pages of thrilling basketball action, which is then interrupted by a surprise Rottweiler attack. That isn't an attack at all, it's just the neighbor dog Dookie, who is under the impression he's still a puppy. At this point, I was sitting here like, is this book ever gonna get started? Where are we going with this one, Stein? Emery appears on the scene and is like, "Oh no, I didn't realize you were also afraid of dogs, Jake. We can help you through this. The first thing you need to do is admit you're afraid so you can face your fears." This dad is annoying the hell out of me. The moment Jake is reasonably startled by something, it gets blown out of proportion by this man. On a positive note, Emery says he'll get Jake a dog to help him get over his fears, which I would be pleased about. Any excuse to get a dog as a kid. The story cuts to later that day, and Jake is walking home from Carlos's house after dinner. He's admiring the clear night sky and the perfectly manicured lawns of all the Beverly Hills mansions when he's suddenly caught in a strange green mist 2 blocks from his house. The mist aggressively spreads, and soon Jake can't see anything. He spots the outline of a tall figure in the mist, which turns out to be Johnny Scream, but he's not acting like himself. Jake demands to know why he keeps trying to scare him, and Johnny Scream just keeps insisting this is real, and he can't allow Jake to go home. Jake is like, "This is all just makeup you're wearing," and grabs onto Johnny's face, but finds his hands suddenly stuck in thick, syrupy skin. He pulls away, and strings of taffy-like skin stick to his hands. I guess that's why the guy on the cover is so melty looking. As Jake struggles to escape, he feels himself being shaken, because this was only a dream. And a pretty obvious one at that, I have to say. I'm again asking, when is this story actually going to get started? I'm just not finding this book to be particularly engaging, like, at all. Jake opens his eyes to find his dad shaking him awake from this nightmare. Jake mentions how in his nightmare, Johnny Scream wouldn't let him go, and this causes his dad to jump up in triumph because he's like, "Aha, you were scared. Don't you feel a million times better admitting it?" This father has a one-track mind. This sends them into yet another shouting match, with Jake declaring he's not scared of his dad's movies, and his dad being like, "It's okay, you can admit you're scared. It's no big deal. Now go to sleep." The chapter then ends with Jake again wondering, how can he prove to his dad that he's not scared of the Scream School movies? The next morning, Chelsea stops by as Jake is finishing up his Frosted Flakes, the cereal of choice for all Goosebumps protagonists. She invites him to explore the UCLA campus with her mom, when Emery bursts into the kitchen and wants to know if the kids would like to be extras in his scene for his current movie, which both kids excitedly agree to. The scene involves, it's a big art class at Scream School. A boy is locked in a supply closet at the back of the room. The kids are making so much noise they can't hear him pounding on the closet door trying to get out. The kids are all working on art projects. Suddenly, a boy shouts, "Hey, check out my project." The kids all look up. The boy has a bunch of big snakes, poisonous snakes, climbing all over the table. They look around and there are snakes everywhere. Snakes on the tables, on the floor, snakes in the sink, snakes crawling up the walls. Everyone panics. They all start screaming and running around. The boy finally bursts out of the supply closet. He can't believe what he sees. The room is emptied out and he's surrounded by hissing snakes. It's pretty clear how this will end for Jake. While at the set, waiting for the scene to fully set up, Jake heads back to the snack table to help himself to a bagel. He then runs into teen star Devin Clare, famous for high school vampire movies, and will be the kid locked in the art closet scene. This encounter is really forced and weird. Its sole purpose appears to be to explain how Jake and Devin look so much alike that they could be twins. It's obvious this will factor into the snake scene later on somehow. I did warn you this book is predictable. Stein spends a few pages putting way too much detail into the various job functions on a movie set, but eventually Devin is in the art closet ready to do his scene, when he suddenly feels extremely sick and has to leave the set. Since Devin and Jake have been established to look like twins, Emery decides to have Jake appear in the scene since it's going to be filmed from behind anyways. They just need Jake to stand at the art closet and shake the door handle. The assistant director then announces they've lost one of the snakes, but Emery doesn't want to waste any more time and wants them to shoot the scene anyways and worry about finding the snake later. We spend a few more pages setting up the scene, and when it's finally time for Jake to start banging on the door, he feels a snake wrap around his leg. At first, he tries to push through it and perform the scene, but he ends up screaming for help. This infuriates his father, and we see that there was actually no snake around Jake's leg. He was just feeling one of the various power cords strewn across the set, which doesn't sound very safe in and of itself. His dad is full on disgusted with Jake and wants him to admit that the Scream School movies scare him, and so does being on set, which Jake denies. He just thought there was an actual snake wrapped around his leg. Devin reappears and is ready to shoot the scene now, so Emery sends Jake backstage to the snack table, where this time a snake actually slithers between his legs. But for some reason, Stein just decides to move right past this snake scare scene and cuts to 2 weeks later. After the second snake incident, Jake hasn't been invited back to set in weeks and has instead spent his summer vacation hanging around Beverly Hills. He still has a complex about proving to his dad that he's brave, so he's made sure to buy lots of Edgar Allan Poe books and horror magazines, so his dad can see him reading them by the pool. We then jump to Jake's birthday morning, and he races downstairs expecting to see his favorite breakfast, but just finds a note on the fridge saying it's the last day of filming, so his dad's gonna send a car to bring him to set, and then they'll all go up to dinner for his birthday that night. A limo arrives, and I have to say, Stein is spending a lot of time in this book on unnecessary details. Like, he has Jake go through an outfit change even, and just waste time describing anything and everything. It's making it clear this book needed a shit ton of padding compared to even the usual Goosebumps padding we see. It's a paper-thin plot in this one. At the studio, Jake is led to Soundstage 13 to meet his dad, but this whole process is drug out for pages, as Jake is uneasy about the strange old man who's taken him to see his dad. Once inside Soundstage 13, the old man shuts the door and locks Jake in. This is clearly gonna be a surprise party setup, so it's hard to find any tension in what Stein's going for. Jake walks around the soundstage looking for another way out, and spends a couple pages admiring some old costumes. For real, this book is taking its sweet-ass time. The costume pile starts to move around, and soon two ghoulish-looking people appear out of the old pile of clothes. They're both dressed in all black and are moaning about being forgotten in the old studio. But now that Jake's here, they can finally make their movie. Two more figures appear out of the clothes rack and start being ghosty at Jake too, saying they're all ready to be stars. Jake then sees one of the new ghouls is carrying Chelsea's head on a stick. Like I said, this is all so out of left field and so clearly a surprise party setup, it's hard for me to find it enjoyable. This book just isn't doing it for me, and the fact that this scene is spanning multiple chapters isn't helping. Jake runs through the studio looking for an escape, but eventually gets caught by these movie star ghost things. He's terrified and thinks he's about to die, when a curtain lifts and people shout, "Surprise! Happy birthday!" Everyone gets awkwardly quiet when they see Jake on the floor crying. His mom drops to the floor to hug him, saying what a horrible idea this was, and the dad just says, "He always tells me he isn't scared. He always tells me he's as brave as I am, so I decided to believe him. I thought he'd enjoy it." I like horror movies. Doesn't mean I'd want to be in a real-life horror movie situation. What's the logic here? Other than that Emery continues to be a fucking asshole. This book should be about Jake seeking revenge on his father from here on out. Which, shocker, it predictably will be. Jake ends up running out of the studio, horribly embarrassed, while Emery gives a "I'm sorry if" apology, which are not true apologies. It then jumps to later that summer, and Jake is swimming in the pool with Emery, who is busy aggressively doing his 100 daily laps. When Emery's all done swimming, he spits water onto Jake and tells him they're going to start filming Scream School 6 at an abandoned high school in the desert. He wants Jake to join him, but doesn't want to scare him this time. Jake, of course, insists that he doesn't get scared on film sets, because this book is content to recycle the same conversations ad nauseum. The next chapter opens with Jake outside this abandoned high school in Nowhere, Nevada, and Emery's busy giving orders to the crew like usual. Jake spends some time chatting with the actor who plays Johnny Scream, and he offers to let Jake play the Johnny Scream CD-ROM game on his laptop if he gets bored. I love whenever they say CD-ROM. They're interrupted by Emery, who wants Jake to go inside the school and scout out the old lunchroom for an upcoming scene. That is, of course, if he's not too scared, but Jake insists he's not for the 100th time in this story. While wandering the abandoned high school, Jake wonders where everyone in town went, because a high school this large must have held a lot of kids, but he's only seen like 6 locals in the area. As he's wandering the halls, he gets a cobweb scare before deciding to search the basement for the lunchroom. He finds it behind the first door he sees, and is unsettled by what a mess the place is. He spots a vending machine across the room that looks like it's been battered in with an axe. The door then slams shut behind him, and Jake realizes he's no longer alone. A girl emerges from the shadows and introduces herself as Mindy. She's shy, but Jake eventually learns she's from the next town over, and is supposed to be an extra in the movie. She got separated from the group and wound up lost in the basement somehow. She also reveals she's supposed to be killed by Johnny Scream in her scene, so that feels more like a character role than just an extra. Jake asks her why the town was abandoned, and Mindy tells him how she used to live here too. She goes on to say that the townspeople decided to build a high school on top of an old graveyard, so all the coffins had to be dug up and relocated. It's all very poltergeist. The ghosts of the dead didn't like that though, and began to terrorize the school. Kids would see images of rotten heads in their lockers, found dead squirrels and mice in the cafeteria food, lights fell from the ceilings, lockers slammed on kids' hands, and eventually the ghosts attacked in the gym. A bunch of ghosts rushed the gym during volleyball practice and wrapped the team up in a net, while the rest of the school was able to empty out. Police tried to save the kids in the gym, but whenever they approached the building, a wall of fire would spring up, blocking the path. This went on for 3 days before the kids in the gym came staggering out, unable to speak about what happened to them. After that, no one would enter the school, and the entire town moved away over the years. Jake is fascinated by this story, and while wandering the halls, they bump into Mindy's friend Gregory, who proceeds to call Mindy the world's biggest liar after he learns she's been sharing ghost stories. Jake wants to know if the story was true, but Mindy just acts coy about it. It's then the next day, and they're shooting some scenes inside the school, and Stein spends 3 pages describing in detail all the instructions for shooting the school lunchroom scene, where the kids are just supposed to eat lunch like it's a normal day. Have I mentioned how tedious I'm finding this book? The scene starts out fine with the kids all eating lunch like normal, when someone screams that they found a finger in their macaroni. A boy then shouts he found a nose in his chili, and Mindy is horrified when she finds toes in her hamburger, and declares she actually ate one. This causes brief chaos before Emery gets everybody calmed down. He wants to know if Jake is scared, but he's not because, well, you should know this conversation by now. Jake goes on to ask if his dad knows about the history of the school and the graveyard, and Emery just dismisses that as nonsense ghost stories. They go to shoot a different scene outside with a group of 5 cheerleaders, and Mindy has been selected as one of them. I guess she's moved past having just eaten a fucking toe. Emery then has a side conversation with the assistant director to clarify the body parts in the food weren't real, because that would be too interesting for this book. The cheerleaders get ready to shoot their cheer scene when they all start shrieking and sliding around, because I guess the grass was actually super muddy and nobody noticed until now. The girls are covered in mud and the shot is ruined. But this is small potatoes because Mindy leans over and pulls a gray skull out of the mud. It's then the next morning and the set disasters just keep on coming. 2 cameras have been damaged, some cables have been cut, and the trophy case in the school hallway has been filled with tarantulas. Jake finds his dad shouting into his cell phone about how the school really could be haunted, but when he notices Jake nearby, Emery insists he doesn't believe in ghosts, and this is all probably just a crew member holding a grudge. Yeah, probably Jake. Emery and Jake end up walking around the school, looking for a woodshop, when Jake suddenly hears phantom footsteps behind them. Emery insists that's nothing and just a weird echo. Then strange laughter echoes through the halls. Emery tries to dismiss this as just the extras having fun outside, but Jake can tell he's actually scared and just trying to be brave for Jake. They hear laughter in the classroom next to them, so Emery flings the door open but doesn't see anything. He then repeats this process a couple more times without spotting the source of the laughter. Jake accuses Emery of trying to test him again, but it's pretty obvious this is the work of Jake, right? It's just not subtle at all. We then cut to the woodshop to film the next scene. Mindy just so happens to be in this scene too, so she's getting a lot of work for just being an extra. I would think she's a full-on character at this point. In this scene, the 4 girls are supposed to stumble across Johnny Scream wielding a power saw in the woodshop. Emery begins filming, but when Johnny Scream doesn't move on his cue, he rushes up to Johnny and is horrified to discover it was just a mask, and the clothes crumple to the ground. This causes the room to panic again because the actual Johnny Scream appears to be missing, and no one understands how his clothes were just standing there unsupported this whole time. Jake begs his dad to leave because the school is haunted, but Emery refuses. Although he does acknowledge he is scared this time, Emery then says they're shooting the final classroom scene today no matter what. The story then cuts to Mindy and Jake chatting, and they both comment how stubborn Emery is, letting the reader know, yeah, both Mindy and Jake are in on these events if you haven't realized it yet. This book is just blah. The book then jumps to Emery and Jake entering the classroom to film the final scene, except they don't see any crew, just student extras in their seats with their backs towards the front of the room. There's a high-pitched hissing sound as Emery walks into the room confused, but before he can figure out what it is, the kids all turn around at the same time and reveal themselves to be ghouls. They were all ghouls, with sagging, melting green skin, sunken eyes and rotting sockets, grinning, toothless mouths, decaying purple tongues lapping over blackened lips. Chunks of skin fell off their cheeks and chins, eyes plopped wetly onto the desktops and rolled onto the floor. And as the ghouls turned, hissing as if all their life was leaking out of them, they reached out their arms, yellowed, gnarled, skinless fingers, clawing at the air as if they were trying to grab Emery and Jake. Emery tries to flee the room, but crashes into Johnny Scream, except this isn't his buddy Johnny Scream. This Johnny Scream shouts that he's the real deal, back from the dead. Emery falls to the ground in fear. Then Jake starts laughing because, oh my god, this was all a setup. Who saw that coming? The extras were all in on the joke, including Johnny Scream, and they all pull off these elaborate masks. Jake is like, that's what you get for ruining my birthday, and hopes his dad now understands that anyone can get scared. Although I'm pretty sure his dad's whole point was that anybody can get scared and it's important to acknowledge when you're scared, but whatever. I'm glad Jake got his revenge, but at the same time, I really don't care that much because this book sucked. That night, Emery and Jake are hanging out in their trailer, and Emery's like, that was a good scare. I'm glad you got it on film. Let's watch it. They put on the scene, and Emery freaks out when the extras can't be spotted in their seats, meaning the kids really were ghosts. Not really though, because in a final page attempted twist, as Emery is frantically packing up to race home, Jake steps outside to congratulate Mindy on a well-executed prank. Mindy goes on to say, gee, weren't we clever to film that classroom without any kids in it, so when your dad watched the tape later, it would look like the room was empty and we were actually ghosts the whole time? This doesn't make any fucking sense though, because they filmed the man being attacked by ghouls. I guess we're just supposed to think the moment Emery saw footage of an empty room, he was like, oh my god, the kids were never there, and didn't watch anything past that moment? I don't know, this book is bad, or maybe I'm just not getting it, but I also don't care to figure it out at this point. Jake then walks into the trailer and announces to his dad, who's the king of horror? I am. So that's how this one ends, with Jake getting some muddled revenge in this tedious ass book. Overall, I thought Scream School kinda sucked. I acknowledge it was an attempt at a different setup for a story, but we've seen Stein pull that off better, as recently as Are You Terrified Yet? I found this book to be dull, repetitive, padded to high hell, and just not worth the read. I liked the strained father-son dynamic Stein spent some time establishing, but it kind of felt like he lost track of what he was trying to say with it. That's pretty much the only positive thing I have to say for this one. I'm gonna give this one 1 out of 5 rolls of film. I just flat out didn't like it, and it took me forever to get through because I was so bored throughout the process. As far as the vomit count goes, we're once again sitting steady with no new vomits. This leaves the Series 2000 total at 11. Well, that's it for Scream School. I'll just say I'm glad it's over with. Next week is The Mummy Walks. We're getting deep into the Series 2000 books now because I have zero memory of this cover or ever even hearing about this story. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Scream School. Was I too hard on this one? I don't think I was. Would you rather read about an actual Scream School movie? Do you think Jake went on to become a Nepo baby? Also, what did you think of my Scream clips this week? Scream is my favorite horror movie franchise, so I was happy to have a loose excuse to feature them all properly. Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
the pride, the love,